Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Deirdre Mendez, Director of the Center for Global Business. I'm grateful to Dean Lillian Mills, Dean of the Macomb School of Business, for being with us this evening to introduce our very special guest speaker. Dean Mills, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to welcome all of you to the Center for Global Business Global Impact Speaker presentation. Our Center for Global Business supports our international business education, both at Macomb's and the wider university. We provide value to our global alumni through speaker events like this. And we're looking to expand ways for international business advocates to connect with our mission to prepare all our students to be global leaders tomorrow. I'm so proud to introduce my colleague, Dr. Kishore Gawande. He's a professor and department chair in our Department of Business, Government, and Society. He holds the Fred H. Moore Centennial Professorship of International Management. Dr. Gawande is an award-winning professor whose research centers on the effect of socioeconomic and political events on economies. I'm grateful to him this evening for sharing his findings in a groundbreaking study on the Chinese economy and property rights. I have read the paper and learned so much. You're very much going to enjoy how Dr. Gawande will describe the role of property rights policy introduced by the Chinese government in 2007 and the way it boosted the country's economy, as well as potential fallout of a recent change in direction for China's economy and therefore possibly the global economy. So Kishore, I'm delighted to give it over to you, and thank you to all of you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lil, for that very generous introduction. I really appreciate it very much. So I'm ready. Should I just share screen and go with it?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you can see my screen which says Modern China. All right.
We can, Kishore.
All right, so here goes. Thank you all for coming. This is it's awesome. I hope we all go away feeling like we've learned things. Even students in my class who have been subject to more than a couple of cases to do with China, and they already know China through those cases, and I want to bring something new to them as well. So the title is a long one. It's Modern China. I want you to understand modern China. We've got to go back to sort of the beginning of modern China, which is going back to Mao's regime from the 40s. And so that's what I'll do for the first 10 minutes and introduce this great character, Deng Xiaoping, who by any you ask anybody who is the founder of modern China, and this name is going to come up. So a bit of history about Deng Xiaoping. He's the founding father of modern China. He was close to Mao throughout Mao's life, and he survived the Long March. The Long March is this iconic event that turned power over to Mao, where Mao escaped, and he had some survivors along with him on the march, and Deng was one of them. Mao was paranoid, and that's the correct term to use for him. And dictators are paranoid because they don't know where the threat on their life and their regime is going to come from. And so his way of doing things was either my way or nobody else's way. So there was this event called the Great Leap Forward. His idea of industrializing China. It was a disaster. It was such a disaster that it led to a famine. And the famine of 1962 killed 30 million people. It sidelined Mao and gave de facto power to Deng and another person called Liu Xiaoqi. Mao took it back with the Cultural Revolution in the 60s. He didn't want to lose power. And, he made as if, okay, we are modernizing. Here's the Renaissance happening in China. And when the people who would be the part of the Renaissance identified themselves, he purged them. And that was the Cultural Revolution. It was bait and switch, as, brutal as you can imagine. And he identified the capitalists and he purged them. Mao was about class struggle. And he says, without class struggle, there is no China. And so he was all about making China struggle class-wise so that everybody would be equal, but to become equal, you had to struggle. That was his philosophy. And he purged Deng a second time. Deng got reinstated again. Deng's son was hunted by the Red Army during the Cultural Revolution and became a paraplegic. Uh, he tried to reform. I mean, Deng tried to reform again and was purged again by Mao in 1976, by which time Mao died. A struggle ensued, and Deng defeated his opposition. That's Deng's personal story, and it's very strongly reflected in what Deng does after that. And he personifies not class struggle anymore, but development and modernization. That's his mantra. And so 1980 to 1990 is the first time where Deng's trying to get China moving forward into development. Modernization is still a very far-flung thing. And so crossing the river by feeling the stones is this philosophy of Deng, which is basically translates into small experiments on economic reform in agriculture, in town and village enterprises and things of that nature. My students in my class know this evolution, but let me repeat this. So agriculture, for example, before 1980 was communal. So the country was broken into communes. This is an important story for the property rights aspect of where I'm taking you. Agriculture was communal. Communes had land. They farmed the land, and each commune, after it took whatever it needed to subsist, food, eat, it had to give up all its output to the state. And a truck would come, take it, load it, and take it away. That was agriculture. And the whole idea was, everybody would get enough to eat, especially in the cities, and agriculture was always second class. And so in Anhui province, which is one of the poorest provinces in China, till today, it's not a rich province, but at that time it was really poor. It was completely agrarian. Uh, Deng allowed small experiments. And the experiments went something like this, that you can produce, this is what you give the state up, but whatever you've left, you can sell or whatever you want to do with it. And the farmers just, their productivity shot up because, there was no incentive to produce in the old days because all your stuff was gone anyway for free. But here you could produce more, and whatever you produced, you could get paid for it. And then whatever you got paid, you could buy other things. And the productivity in 3 to 4 years shot up 20 times in agriculture. And when Deng saw this, he let go in every province. And this was very widespread in all agrarian provinces, all of these things happening. And because all of these things were happening in agriculture, around these little villages grew town and village enterprises because you had this extra money and you were buying things. And so when there was this demand created for products, these little enterprises, clothes making, stitching, all these services, they came up as town and village enterprises, TVEs, very small, and they boomed. And suddenly there was an economy happening, like a market-based economy that was happening. And towards the end of that decade, China was, I mean, Deng was well on his way to, thinking through the fact that there could be modernization, there could be development. So what's the message from this? The message from this is twofold. One is your incentives, but there were no such things, are completely transformed. In fact, there is such a thing as incentives, and incentives are the stuff of growth, where your market incentives, you want to produce, you want to do more because that's your way of getting richer. We take it for granted, but what I'm trying to get across is this is the evolution of where incentives come from. So that's the market at work, and it did great things. And there was a massive decentralization underway. China was this big centrally planned economy, and now you have decentralization. You have town and village enterprises. You have export zones. You have all of these things coming up. I want to explain to you what happens at that time. At that time, students, you've heard about this Tiananmen Square thing, but it's a big event. And the big event is that students revolt because they are seeing liberalization possibilities, and young people, dynamic people, they want to take that further ahead. And they were really stretching the boundaries of the freedoms that they would be allowed. And Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes from that time has this great show, and I hope you can see it. It'll help you understand Xi Jinping today. But the center saw this as a threat to political power, and it took back the decentralization. It said no more. And what it did, so let's go back to this decentralization part. And what does that mean? What does decentralization, this word decentralization, sorry, I'm messing my graph up, but decentralization is a big thing. What decentralization, and China is a very decentralized economy. So because the growth is happening locally, they need some revenues. Like counties and states, they are taking growth forward. And so what Deng did was he said, okay, you can have all the tax revenue that we collect. China has no income tax, zero, and its tax revenue comes from a value added tax. And a value-added tax is like a sales tax. You go to a restaurant, you eat, and on the bill they'll stamp a sales tax, and that's a sales tax revenue. So that's your restaurant value-added tax. But here there is a value-added tax at every stage of production. That's where China gets its tax revenue. And what Deng did was give this entire tax revenue to the states and to these local governments, saying, do what you need, industrialize locally, do good things, produce public goods. Public goods is a big thing in economics, which says education, healthcare, pensions, all the things that citizens want, and you need money for that. And Deng said, take it. And now what happens after Tiananmen is Deng goes, I gave you so much freedom, you took advantage of it, and I'm not going to give you any more tax revenue. This is actually a very big story, and the reason why you have heard about local governments going broke. This is where it all starts. So the question now is the following. This is a question that I'm posing to you. I want you to think about it. The question is, the central government, you want to understand how China is governed, okay? How China is governed is I don't want this pen. I want this map. I want to show you this map. Maybe it'll come up on the screen. Maybe it won't. Oops, I don't know how to get this on the screen. Can you see a map? Can you see this map? Can you see this map? Apologies. Let me see if I can get you to this map. I want you to see this map so you and I are on the same page here. Uh, no map. All right. In any case, I wish I could show you this map, but doesn't look like I can. No map. All right. Here's what I want to say. What I want to say is that
We see it.
oh, you see this map over here?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So this is how China is governed. You see these, you see the pink small prefectures. That's a prefecture is a unit which is governed by very powerful local governments. And a prefecture is a city and the counties surrounding it. That's what a prefecture is. There's 300 prefectures in China. That's where all the governance and all the growth and all the industry happens. That's where the power lies in the decentralization. So each of these prefecture governors, prefecture level leaders, they call mayors. Mayors have a lot of power. They're given a lot of power. And the power that they have is pretty awesome. And uh, they are in charge of providing healthcare and schooling and pensions and growth and all kinds of stuff. The central government, which is the party, Xi Jinping, Deng Xiaoping, they don't do this. They what they do is defense, national security, the big stuff. But they don't do they don't reach the China's public. So that's an important sort of thing to keep in mind. Okay, so let me take that out. So I'm not sure how to do this again. All right, can you now see the full screen with modern China, etc.? Okay, so here's the story. So the message from here is that city governments, that's the prefecture level governments, are responsible for delivering public goods and economic growth, and these are fabulously capable bureaucrats. And the big question is, where is the money coming from for the city governments to provide all these things? That's the question that I want to pose to you. And here's where this thing starts. And that's the background for our property rights paper, right? So I hope you can see this slide, which starts with our research, 1990 to 2012. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see that.
We can see it.
All right, excellent. So that's so I'm taking you to our research. I want to spend 10 minutes on this and take you here. So question number one, where is this money coming to local governments from? Keep that at the back of your mind, but I'm not going to fully answer it, but let me take you to this property rights thing. This is the paper that Dean Mills was referring to. And here's sort of economic theory behind this, right? So we all understand property rights. We take it for granted. The fascinating thing about studying China is you are understanding life without property rights. So before the year 2005, there were no private property rights. Everything in China was publicly owned. There was no land, no buildings that any person could own. And because there were no property rights, there was no security about property rights. So let's say you ran a small business, right, like a restaurant, and you wanted money to grow bigger. So here what you do is you go, okay, I'm going to go to the bank and borrow a loan. And the bank is going to go, okay, you pledge your restaurant in case you don't pay back the loan, and we'll give you a loan and you can expand your business. So that pledgeable asset which is your restaurant, you could pledge it here for a loan. That's capital that's deployed. And because you can get the loan, you can grow your business and all that stuff. But if you could not pledge your asset to get loans, then that's dead capital. That's capital just lying around, and it's money on the table. You're not growing it. You're not using it. Everything that we do here in the United States. And so that's the idea of dead capital. And what property rights do is bring dead capital back to life. That's the title of our paper, and that's his idea. So what is property rights? Property rights in China is a constitutional amendment. Anything that's big has to be written into the Constitution. And so it's a 2007 constitutional amendment that says that property rights, that private property, whoever owns it, if you own something and you got a title to it, it's inviolable. And that term was only used previously for public property. Public property is inviolable. So it belongs to the state. Do not violate it. Here, for the first time, you're saying private property is inviolable. It's a very big deal. And suddenly, because property rights are now guaranteed by the state, and it's a constitutional law, business just surges. And it's not business. So in our paper, we have the universe of Chinese firms for 10-year period, a huge data set. My Chinese co-author, who's my PhD student and a professor in China, he's got all this data. And it's a universe of firms, all firms in China. So we know how many firms were born, how many firms died. And we find that this property rights gave birth to about 100,000 firms every year after 2007. That's the power of property rights. That businesses are coming into being that were never born. So now you have dead capital coming to life, and we have a bunch of findings, and I won't take you down to the details of it, but that's the long and short of this property rights paper. And during Q&A I can tell you a lot more. We've done research on other aspects of things called state capacity in China, where you're creating decentralized capacity to do many things, to provide public goods. That's the meaning of state capacity to do things for the public. And suddenly you're seeing a lot of state capacity being created. We have another paper on pollution regulations. It's still got a long way to go, but there is some initial success here. We have a paper on innovation policy in China. It's not been terribly successful, but now you're seeing EVs, and there's a whole talk about China dominating electric vehicles. So the innovation in certain sectors is pretty strong. And here's the question here's another question I want to ask. Since there is no retirement system, this is a big question that is being asked again, and the answer is very different today. At that time, and I'm taking you back to maybe 10, 15 years ago, there's no retirement system in this country. You have a one-child policy, and the population are huge savers. They're not huge consumers. So they're earning, they're growing, their earnings are really quadrupling. If you were over your generation of 30 years of work, your income increased 10 to 20 fold if you were decently educated. And so all of that income, what are you doing with it? Are you spending it? So the United States is a very consumer-based economy. People like to consume. It's not a bad thing. And that consumption creates GDP, and GDP creates income, and that income creates consumption, and that cycle is a virtuous cycle. And therefore, we are an immensely wealthy country, because that's that GDP. It's not just consumption spending. There is firms doing investment spending. and all of these things add up to why this is this economy just whirls and keeps going. And here in China, you have huge saving and not a whole lot of consumption spending because people are thinking differently. Here, you're not so worried about retirement because you have Social Security, but there you don't have Social Security. So you're saving up for the time you're going to retire. So what happens to that savings? Is that a problem? And the answer is it's not a problem if it's channeled into the right places for growth. And all the savings that people had in the banks went into creating firms because now you had property rights security. And all of this thing came together to create a huge amount of growth for China. So I hope that the intuition behind that is sort of clear. And well, let me finish that. And that's the main intuition that I wanted to bring to you. And the confluence of all of these things, where you have property rights security, you have private property rights, you have a lot of money, you have banks with cash from people's savings. Banks are loaning, they're loaning to productive uses, new firms are being born, all kinds of stuff is happening over here. There's infrastructural spending. If you go drive, Shanghai to Beijing, these are like 8-lane highways. They're going to put Texas highways to shame. The infrastructure is so good over there. And I want to take you to today, and then take you to Q&A. I'm not sure, Deirdre, if you could just on chat or just let me know how much time I've got for this presentation session. 10 minutes.
10 minutes is fine. You have plenty of time.
Excellent. I could take more, but I'll reserve that for Q&A. So what's happened since Xi Jinping came? I'm not saying I'm not making Xi out to be a bad guy or a good guy. That's not. I'm not being normative. I'm being positive. So positive economics is like I'm explaining what happened rather than discussing what should happen. So should is not in my diction right now, but I can go there. But I'll leave that for Q&A. But what's happening right now, and this became obvious in around 2021, is with Ant Financial, with Jack Ma, these big, in my class I do this framework of institutions. So very briefly, what's happening is the Chinese central government has power. It's got de jure power. It's got the power over the country. It doesn't want it challenged in any way. You saw that in Tiananmen. You've seen that it happened again, but not like Tiananmen. But whenever it's happened, whenever the central government, the party, the Politburo, the small group that determines the future of China, feels threatened, it's going to impose its power. And so it let go through all these years, these property rights changes, everybody's making a ton of money. And real estate, if you look at Bloomberg had this article about China's 40 billionaires. Out of the 40 billionaires in China, this was about 10 years ago, 20 of them made their money in real estate. And I'm coming to that story on real estate, but it's all kind of connected. These are different. You think these are different stories, but they're all connected. Like this property rights is very connected with how savings is going into productive use. But if you take the property rights back or make property rights insecure, which is what she did with Jack Ma. You haven't heard Jack Ma's name for the last 4 years. And the reason is that the party, that she felt that these big firms, the counterpart of Bezos and Zuckerberg and Larry Page, that's making Xi nervous, and he's taking property rights back. And he threatened Jack Ma with penalties, imposed billions of dollars of fines for some trumped up reason, and trying to show Jack Ma who's boss. And so we let you live, we let you make the money, you're making a ton of money. Why do you want to even challenge? Why do you want free speech? We're giving you everything you want. So don't say anything against the party. Do not ask for too much. You already have a lot. And so shush. And that was his message. And you haven't heard from Jack Ma after that. But what this did was send the message that property rights security is no more guaranteed. But when that feeling goes through an economy, you're going to have exactly the opposite of what I described. So firm growth has slowed. And now you still have banks flush with money because, all of that Chinese, in this setting, so let me tell you the story about another student of mine who's a professor in China. He bought a house. He bought a house for 1 million RMB, which is about $150,000. It's a lot of money in China. He bought a house. And the house he bought, he paid for advance and then all that. And as soon as his payment had completed and the property boom just kept going for 15, 20 years. And the thinking was if I buy a house and I sell it in 2, 3 years, I'm going to almost double its value if it's in a nice location. And this was in a nice location, not in Beijing, but maybe 30, 40 miles away, another city close to Beijing. The property values have started dropping because something about insecure property rights took hold in China. Of course, COVID and all is a story too, but I'm not going to COVID. I'm talking about a long-term thing which has to do with property rights, security, and insecurity. And now the growth suddenly slowed down, and the growth in property values just clamped down. It's just shut down. In fact, my student tells me very unhappily that if he sold the house now, he's going to lose money. And so, he's got all his resources. He's just making his monthly payments. So that's the state of many in this Chinese population, many well-to-do people. And the result of that is you will save more. You will not consume. But if you don't consume and you're going to save more, it's all going to go to the bank. Now banks are flush with the savings. What do? What did they do? There was a great demand for these by growing firms, etc. Now the demand is not there from firms, new firms, and growth. Growth is not happening in the private sector like it used to happen. But there's one sector that's growing like crazy, and I still don't know why, because the prices are coming down, and that's real estate. And so all of this money, and I can, if there's a Q&A, I'll explain the parallels between the US 2008 crisis and what's happening there. It's very similar, and all of this money savings is now being funneled into not productive uses. It used to go into productive uses, but now it's not that productive. And let me finish with a story. The same thing happened in Japan in 1990. Japan, throughout the 70s and 80s, grew on the backs of exports, much like China has done. And it became a huge economy. Every question we're asking about China today was being asked about Japan in the 80s and 90s. That is going to become bigger than the United States. It's going to be this growth, that. And so what should we do? And it wasn't these Trump tariffs, but there was something like that during Reagan's time, where he told the Japanese, you have to stop your exports of cars and trucks into the United States. Otherwise, I'm going to put tariffs. And so they voluntarily stopped. But the point that I want to get to is the following. What happened at that time is not, and the real estate boom in Japan was like nobody had ever seen before. And these banks were loaning, the biggest banks in the world. If you looked at the top 10 banks, the 5 biggest of them, 5 out of those top 10 were Japanese banks. And the reason was that all the Japanese wealth was being saved in these banks. But where was that savings going? The savings wasn't going into productive use like it used to in the 70s, 80s. It's going into real estate. But what were the real estate people doing? Were they building productive things? No, they were building shopping malls. They were building unproductive things that went bust. So when the property bust happened, and this is the early 1990s, all these banks went broke because the loans they had made to developers to build these properties weren't coming back. They were all bankrupt. And because the banks were bust, when the time came for them to loan to firms like Toyota, like big industrial firms, they didn't have it. And industrial growth in Japan stopped. And you probably know this, but if you didn't, you should. That the per capita income of Japan, how much per person income is today, is the same as it was in 1990. It hasn't changed. That's the scale with which these busts can really have this huge negative effect for generations. And so Japan is still rich, but had it kept growing, it would be one of the mightiest economies in the world. It's still a mighty economy, but it's a 1990 mighty economy. It didn't keep up with the time. So I'm not saying that this is going to happen with China, but these are historical lessons, and I'm going to stop share, and we can go to Q&A. Thank you for listening.
Kishore, thank you. That is so fascinating, and thank you for starting with the story to bring everybody up to date. And this is certainly something that we're all going to be watching. We have a few questions in the chat, but I'm sure there are many more questions. So please, everyone, post your question, and I will try to choose some good ones. I know there are many other things you could talk about. But we have one question related to something you've already said. You mentioned innovation policy being mostly unsuccessful in China. And there's been a lot of backlash to Chinese innovations, such as EVs, by, for example, the EU.
Great.
So do you see this being an issue with other technological innovations in China, or are EVs a unique case?
Oh, this is such a great question. This is completely pertinent to what we've been discussing. So, you know, on the trade side, there is this whole philosophy about what is free and fair trade. And I'm not saying that China doesn't play fair, but being fair means that you are not growing on the backs of state subsidies. Okay, and that's never been proven or disproven. But the Western mindset belief is that the Chinese EV industry has grown on the back of state subsidies. And that's why the EVs are so cheap. Not because they are hugely productive on the shop floor. Now, I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but this was a very similar back to Japan in the 70s and the 80s, where they wrecked the US auto industry with exports of small cars. You know, we like our big cars, okay, as you've seen. And there was this gas price which quadrupled, and nobody wanted big cars, but there were no small cars excepting Japanese cars. And so they invaded the US with cars, and it's a similar story here. But you know, a lot of backlash to the Chinese innovation is a bit of both things, if you ask me. It's a bit of the fact that the US and the EU is caught on the back foot. That all the EVs that we've made are these huge $100,000 F-150 EVs. That's the EVs that make money in the United States. But the people are demanding Teslas and smaller cars at half the price of a Tesla, not half the price, but a cheap Tesla. And that's what the Chinese EVs are promising. That we'll give you a Tesla and we'll give it to you for 50% or 60% of what a Tesla costs. And suddenly, we are on the back foot. And so the question is, what do we do now? Now, you have Trump tariffs, you have 100, 200% tariffs. And on the national security side, there is a somewhat of a valid concern. I don't know whether this is true, but if you have all this hacking software and privacy software that's installed in these cars by the state, I don't know. Technology is moving so fast that you can't really prove or disprove this. So it's not a unique case because soon you're going to see Chinese chips come out, and chips are the next big thing, GPU things. Who's going to produce that for all the AI machines that are hungry for these chips? China says that it's got the technology to do it. Taiwan, we know, has the technology to do it. So this is an excellent question. Excellent question. I'm seeing all the questions, Deirdre. I can take them one by one, no problem. What do you think?
Well, there are more than you will be able to get to. If you would like to go for it, that's perfectly marvelous.
I will be biased towards questions from my students. So yes, Carly. Carly is laughing because she knows. Uh, so I don't want to choose that, Deirdre. I want you to choose a question for me.
Okay, well, I can tell you, and let's just get out of the way this question. Of course, the election is coming up in the questions. So people are wondering what you think the impact will be of the increase in tariffs that we've been discussing, which is further complicated by the dismantling of the CHIPS Act that's being discussed, which will positively affect China. So I don't know whether you have any comments about that. If not, we'll move on. But if you're prepared to speak to that, a lot of people would like to know the answer.
I think this is a great question. I think this deserves an answer. It's not like anybody has an answer. Okay, so I challenge anybody to give a proper answer to this. But I think that the Trump tariffs are going to continue. I think Trump is going to not reduce the tariffs on Chinese goods, but I think that that's a bargaining ploy. When you raise tariffs, what happens is you got the bargaining strength because this is a huge economy. You're shutting down a market that's a big market, and so there you're going to have bargaining strength. Because if you shut down the U.S. market and EU, whatever the U.S. does, the EU is going to do. Where is China going to sell all its industrial output? So you can see what's happening inside China. China is getting ready for something like this. And that's the reason for its 1.5, this is the first stage, it's going to do more. It's a $1.5 trillion stimulus within China to start growing its economy domestically. It wants demand from Chinese consumers to make up for what's lost over here. That's not going to happen because the huge markets are in the EU, are in the United States. So Trump has that bargaining power. He'll bring Xi to the bargaining table. What does Trump want? That's okay. Sorry, I asked that because I don't think even Trump knows the answer to that question. But that bargain is going to bring Xi to the table and admit to many things that the United States wants. I don't quite know what they are, but there will be. Like buy more of our Iowa soybeans, buy more of our products. Unless and until you open your economy to American goods and services, we're not buying your stuff. And it better not be cheap talk. And that CHIPS Act is very much into this thing. The CHIPS Act is a whole, it's different from the trade wars thing. I think it's trying to bring production of this new technology home because that's going to determine, technological might and dominance and standards over the generation of all our students who are tuned in today. So that's a really big. The CHIPS Act is a big deal. Bringing production of these high-end cutting edge technologies is a big thing, and the U.S. doesn't want to lose that war.
Thank you, Kishore. Here's a question that is directly relevant to what you've been discussing. Given China's shift from an export-driven economy to pursuing common prosperity alongside the ongoing real estate crisis, how do you see the changing consumption patterns of China's middle class affecting global trade flows, especially in sectors like luxury goods, technology, and essential commodities?
It's an excellent question, and in fact, that's what my answer was sort of. But let me get deeper into this question. It is a many trillion dollar question. This is exactly what Xi Jinping wants to ask all his economic advisors as to how do we get Chinese consumers to start buying, to start consuming, because that's the virtuous cycle. The more consumption, the greater the growth, the more the GDP, the greater the income generated back to households, and then that cycle happens, and then firms are growing by doing investment spending. So macroeconomics in like 2 minutes, right? So that's the cycle that Xi Jinping desperately wants to get into gear. What's the problem? The problem is the drag on the banks and the local governments. The local governments are broke because they did what the United States did in 2008 with their these finance vehicles where they were selling mortgage-backed securities. That's exactly what many of these I can't get too much into the details of that, but long story short, in China, these local governments, because they don't have tax revenues, the central government said, okay, why don't we will give you the rights to the land, the farmland around the cities. So you remember the farmer story? So the local governments go to the farmers and go, we are going to take your land under land takings. We'll give you some money, like 5 years of agricultural output, and they take the land around the cities. That's the local government, the mayor, right? And then they give it to a developer to develop the land. And the developer pays them the money. That's how you get the money to do all your, hospitals and schools and pensions and everything that the central government asks the local governments to do. But here's the problem. The problem is that these developers and so here's let me make this really simple because that'll get to the heart of it, right? Let's say you're a local government. You have land. You just use the rights to land that you were given. You took it from farmers. You took 1,000 acres from farmers, let's say. You paid them some money. And now you're going to sell it to a developer for 10 times the price, right? So you sold it to a developer for 10 times the price you got, and whatever revenue you got, you did the things for schools, healthcare, all that stuff. If the story stopped here, life would be good, right? It's simple. You got the land, you sold the land to the developer, you did stuff. The developer took the land, built some houses, built this, and some growth happened, right? Simple. Everybody okay with this story? That's not what they did. What these guys did is they got the revenue, the local government, as well as the developers, both of them. That's why they're broke. The local governments got the money from the developers. They took this money and they leveraged it and got loans from the bank. So for every dollar that they had, they got like $5 from the bank on loans, saying we'll do this, we'll do that, and we'll return you the money. And the banks gave them the money. Same thing with the developers. They go, we've got this, and based on every piece of land that we have for developing this property, they went to the bank and got $5 worth of loans to build. And so both of these parties are out a whole lot of money, which can only be paid back if there's a lot of growth and taxes. That's how you pay it back. And on the real estate side. So Goldman Sachs estimates that the level of brokenness of all the real estate people and the local governments is close to $10 trillion. This is not a small amount of money. I mean, I think it's an exaggeration, but if that's true, then we are talking about the Japan story from 1990. I really personally hope it's not true, because as Professor Mendes started, as goes China, so goes the world. There is some truth to that. This is a mighty big economy, and its growth has caused a lot of growth in the rest of the world as well. And so it's best for all of us to have China grow. Now, a lot of nationals, and I know I can see Michael he's shaking his head. He goes like, I'm not so sure because the national security aspect of things. Sorry, Michael, I know you didn't shake your head, but I know what you're thinking. And so there's a national security angle here. That's a whole different story. I agree with that. I'm an economist. Let the national security people deal with that. Okay, but if you equate a very rich China with really bad national security, then that's a big thing. And I don't know how the Trump administration is going to think, but that's the thought so far after Xi Jinping. During Deng, there was no such issue, and his proteges. There was never such an issue, but now it's become an issue. So I'm going to stop there and ask Professor Mendes for the next question.
Well, we have several questions about the socioeconomic impact on different categories of people, in particular the rural-urban population divide. How are they affected similarly or differently?
So China's the most, and I will use this word because I think it's one of the biggest things that many economists have seen. I think the most beautiful thing about this whole experience till Xi Jinping is that it's lifted 300 million people out of poverty. It's never been seen anywhere in the world. It's the envy of all development economists. Like, how did you do this? It's almost an impossible thing. And I speak from my experience coming from a country that wants to do exactly this. Lifting 300 million people out from the lower middle class to the middle class and upper middle class. And so we've got a model, and it's an awesome thing. So first part of the question, yes, the rural-urban divide reduced hugely through 2015, but it hasn't reduced that much after 2015. So it's a good question. Growth hasn't happened, especially after COVID, and that's what is the stuff of reducing urban-rural income gaps and standard of living, and it's taken a backseat to what it used to be. I'm ready for the next question.
Okay, here's another one. Who are the initial winners when property rights were established, and what is the legacy of those winners today? How did people maintain their success? And if they weren't able to, what did they do wrong?
OMG, this is an excellent question. The answer is everybody. That's the beauty of a market economy. There you can go overboard with market-based, and capitalism and all that. We know what that means, overconsumption, all that kind of stuff. But look at the upside of this, and everybody gains. You name a person, and I can tell you the story about how he or she gained from this property rights story. If you were a small business, you grew into a large business. If you were, here's something that I want to come to, right? And I've explained this to my to my class, and I feel that the message was well received since we're all in Texas. We take it for granted. Let's say you want to do a deal, between friends or between businesses. You go, okay, here's an idea. I want you to do this for me. I'll pay you this, and let's get something going because you have this expertise and I have this expertise. Let's get together. Many of you will be doing deals like this. And in Texas, the other person is listening and they go, yeah, okay, so let's shake on it. So I extend my hand, and the other person extends their hand, we shake on it. That's a contract. Okay? You sometimes could take that to court. But the point is, because you have this property rights security, that there's this culture, and I keep telling my class that I don't understand this word culture, and I'm using it. But yeah, you develop this culture. It's a very strong word in business. It's called relational contract, and a relational contract is based on things that the business will not survive without this relationship between you and me, because we are bringing so many things that are complementary, skill wise, etc., to the table. When you have property rights security and you're doing so many things, you build this kind of culture where you can do relational contracting. Relational contracting helps everybody, small, big, anything, because once you can trust the person's word, this is a very cool thing. It's the stuff of we don't see it, we don't mention it, but if you go to firms, they go, we do a huge amount of relational contracting because no contract can be written for every contingency. What do you write? You write in a contract, if this happened, then, if this happened, then, if this happened, then. You can't write. All contracts are imperfect. In the end, contracts are completely incomplete. And when you have incomplete contracts, all you've got is your relationship. And that's one of the biggest beneficiaries from you're developing this kind of business culture, you're developing this institution. It's an informal economic institution where you can do relational contracts, and everybody benefits out of this. But as you get into the workforce and as you start working for firms, you will yourself see the meaning of what I'm saying.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, maybe. And this is a question about FDI. But this whole property rights question, of course, property rights for citizens in many countries are different than for foreign businesses. But the question is, given property insecurity, does this affect foreign businesses as they enter the Chinese market? So I'm curious what you have to say about this, if anything.
Oh my God, that was a long question. Deirdre, can you read that one more time?
How
What about FDI?
how might property rights insecurity affect incoming business from overseas, FDI?
Very good question. I know what the person who posted this question has in mind, which is if an American business goes into China and sinks money into starting a business, how can the American entrepreneur be sure about their property rights? Because if you can't guarantee their property rights, only Chinese citizens' property rights, then I'm not going to invest as an American investor. And that's 100% correct. In fact, when you talk about property rights, you're not talking about just these property rights things. Supposing an American business goes and starts business, and life is good till a local government or the central government says, we're going to tax you more. That's sort of expropriation and taking away property rights. That's exactly the reduction of property rights for foreign direct investment. And that's really bad. And you will see that foreign direct investment is not falling, but it's not growing like it used to. It just isn't. There's all of these things that China needs to do, and she is aware of it, but at the same time, he doesn't want another Jack Ma who's going to threaten, and I don't know if Jack Ma ever wanted to threaten his political power, but dictators are paranoid people. And so, they're going to look for threats anywhere they see it and clamp down on it. And so, very excellent question. Great questions. I really enjoyed answering some of them. I wish I could answer all of them.
Thank you, Kishore. This has been such an insightful and enlightening and illuminating presentation. I'm going to watch it again because I learned some things. I'm sure everyone appreciates your sharing those insights with us, and would like to thank you very much for being here this evening.